Thank you, Manuel. Actually, my first answer to that question was, my first response to that question of what will be the next big thing in 10 years was, if I actually knew the answer to that, I wouldn't be here, I would be on an island somewhere. So you can take my answer with a pinch of salt. So, e-commerce is just one part of the digital economy, and I know this is a digital business forum. So what I thought I would talk about is some of the more fundamental transformations that Manuel referenced and try and put a bit of maybe more academic structure around it. Before I do that, I'll start with another quotation, because isn't it always nice to have a nice quotation? And this is from Joseph Schumpeter. So many of you have heard of him. He invented the concept of creative destruction. He was Austria's finance minister and then went on to become one of the first professors at the Harvard Business School. And it's really important when you think about the digital economy to understand what production is. So I like this quote. To produce means to combine materials and forces within our reach. And the materials and forces that we have at our command in business today are not only more awe-inspiring than they've ever been, but never have they been more different than those that previous generations had to work with. So that's quite an abstract concept, and I thought I would try and illustrate it with a story. It's not a story you'll tell your kids, by the way, although it might send them to sleep. This is Hyderabad in India. So 3 years ago, I was working with a large North American business data provider. So those of you who know about business data will be able to narrow that field down to 2 companies, but I'm not going to tell you which one it is. They have a really fundamental part of their data estate, and it's something that's called company fundamentals. And what it is kind of simple. It's all information about every single company in the world. It's information about where they are, what they do, their finances, how many people work there. And the reason that's really important to them, even though it seems quite prosaic, is that it's a linking set. So all of the other data that they provide can be linked off that data, and financial institutions, legal companies, all sorts of businesses around the world can use that. 1,000 people in Hyderabad did that function for them. And 3 years ago, those 1,000 people who rekeyed information from other systems and off the internet and made interpretations were made redundant. They were replaced by 10 guys in an office in New Jersey and an intelligence system which could not only replicate the task of those 1,000 very highly trained, experienced Indian people, they could do the job that those guys did in 1 day, in 1 hour, and they could do it twice as accurately. So 1,000 people lost their jobs in this business, and their boss, who decided he didn't want to respond to that threat. So it's quite a terrifying story, and I guess you've heard many like it. We'll come back to it in a little bit, maybe. But it's part of a trend in the digital economy about productivity, that use of materials and forces. And if you look at the S&P 500 companies and you work out which companies are not just digital in terms of the technology they use, but also digital in terms of the culture that they have, the transparency in the business, the way that decisions are split up between different people within a business, the amount of trust and openness you have. You get to this picture. Digital companies are 7 times more productive than traditional ones in terms of the amount of shareholder value they produce per employee. And that isn't just because I've picked companies like Google and Microsoft, because there are companies like GE in this. This is a fundamental fact across the S&P 500. And actually, if you take companies that are not of this generation, the first generation and second generation digital companies, but the latest ones, King.com, Valve, businesses like that, those are a further 10 times more productive than Google. So they're 70 times more productive than a traditional company. That's a pretty interesting and terrifying thought, because these are billion-dollar scale businesses, right? And they are highly competitive and highly aggressive. The Kaufman Institute did this great piece of research last year, and some of you, again, will have seen this. And their assessment was that over the last 25 years in the US, almost all of private sector jobs, so more than 95%, have been created by businesses less than 5 years old. Which is really quite remarkable. In fact, older businesses, traditional businesses, those more than 40 years old, or more than 5 years old, and public sector institutions are a net sink of jobs. Fewer people work for them than they ever have before. Which led Babson Olin's School of Business to make this prediction. In the next 10 years, 40% of the Fortune 500 companies will be gone. And when I say gone, I don't mean merged, I don't mean acquired, I don't mean rebranded, I mean they will not exist in any form. Somebody asked me yesterday how many businesses have gone under in the last 10 years. A handful, Lehman Brothers being the largest. Hopefully some of you are feeling terrified. It's always a good way to start a presentation. So all of this and nearly 10 years of trying to help businesses with this challenge in a variety of industries has made me wonder what makes a great digital business. And if you start to ask people in the business and you start to think about, read the literature, what the first thing you start with is that it's all about the customer. In a world where information has never been more available and transparent, being focused on your customer rather than focused on yourself is a really important thing to be. Because if you try and deceive anybody, you will be found out. So you have to focus on the customer and their needs. But what you can take that and you can start to expand it a bit, because not only is it all about the customer, we have other things that enable us to serve that customer better. So, for example, as we try and explore the customer and their needs, we can use data and analytics to try and get a better sense of what they want. And we can test product concepts. For example, we can test this fantastic product here. If you ask consumers whether they want a toaster that can print pictures onto the bread in the morning, everybody says they would love that. And so you can have this product, which cost tens of millions of dollars to develop and sold fewer than 1,000 units and was discontinued. But customers told us that was what they wanted. Likewise, you can combine all of the great stuff in the supply chain that provides, let's not forget, 1 billion smartphone units a year, the first billion-dollar technology category ever. You can combine all of those great optics and processing and other things to allow you to look at stock prices in the shower. Google Glass, highly profitable enterprise for Google. Oh, no, sorry, that was something else. So actually, these great things, the digital economy, can be powerful, but they can be deceiving. And you sort of realize that when you really break it all down, that yes, it is about the customer, yes, it is about analytics, and although I joke, it has its uses, it's actually all about growth. Digital allows you to grow in new ways. It allows you to try new business models. Manuel's talked through some of those, new marketing channels, new sales channels. It's all about growth. And you can do those things so much more rapidly than you've ever been able to do. And I imagine a lot of you in this room will have started down that journey and you have realized that there's a two-edged sword there. That as you start to create these new growth opportunities, you start to make your business do things that it never did before. You start to ask people to take decisions more rapidly. You ask them to expand into different countries. You have to build new technology platforms, some of which can be very expensive or very complicated. Some of them are the leading edge. And so you actually start to realize that although the way digital allows you to access your customer is really fundamental, actually the digital economy is all about optimization of your existing business. That it's really hard to create moonshots, and those two products I showed you, although slightly facetious, are real products that people really tried. It's much easier to create shareholder value through optimization. That's why 10 guys can do the job of 1,000. The trouble with that, though, is that as you start to do both of those things, you realize that the world's a lot more complicated than you thought. That as you start to compete as you start to try and find new talent, you start to compete with new people for that talent. As you expand into different markets and have different supply chains, you find yourself competing against a whole range of new companies and new enemies, and potentially finding new partners. And so, although, yes, it is about growth, yes, it's about optimization, you start to become quite existential about this. And you get to this view that actually digital's all about the environment we're operating in. It's all about how you present yourself, the stance you take to the environment. And then you go and become a business school professor and you write about it and you leave somebody else with the challenge. But the trouble is, with digital, when you really start to break it down, the answer to the question, what makes a great digital business, starts to become, well, hey, it's everything about them. They're completely different than us. And that was a bit unsatisfying as an answer, unless, of course, you're a business school professor. And so what I went and did was started to talk to a range of companies. I talked to some great digital companies. Everybody wants to be like Google, hey? But also some more traditional ones, and some of these I know are UK companies, but hey, I'm based in London, it's a lot easier. British Airways, Barclays, HSBC, and of course we talked to Deloitte because it was good to talk to ourselves and be self-referential, and we, in fairness, have gone on quite a long journey in digital ourselves to change. And when you talk to all the people who have led successful transformations in all of these domains, you can start to break down what makes a great digital business into 8 things. Now, some of them I had to invent new words for because, hey, that's what management consultants are for, isn't it? But these 8 things encapsulate the behaviors and the philosophy and the strategy of digital businesses. I'm not going to talk you through all 8 of them because I'm writing a book on it and I want to sell all of these copies of this book, so that would be very foolish of me to do that. But I'll just take you through 3 of the really key ones and give you some examples of what I mean and what some of those behaviors are. So if we take transparency, the British Medical Journal is a very old and storied publication. It's like Nature for the medical profession, be that research or doctors themselves. Print magazine for the majority of its more than 100-year history. The BMJ had to go online a few years ago, as all magazines do. Now, that is a very difficult thing to do. The magazine industry in the UK came up on, I saw on the chart we saw earlier, as the most progressive digital economy. Magazines in the UK have revenues have fallen 15% year to year for the last 5 years. It's pretty bad times. So the British Medical Journal had to do that in the face of it. And they went through a digital transformation that not only took them online and took the magazine onto a fantastic iPad app, but also took them into medical information about treatments, information that doctors could use at the point of care to enhance the delivery of treatment. And one of the key facets when I talked to the chairman of the BMJ about how they had a successful transformation, they persuaded journalists to worry less about technical quality and more about something useful for the end user, was one small thing that they do. Well, it's a small thing to execute, it's a big thing philosophically. Every single management board meeting at the British Medical Journal, every weekly meeting, is live streamed onto their intranet. So every employee can watch live, like a TV show, the management board making its decisions. And not only that, they can also go back for 2 years and look on the intranet and find the videos and watch them back. Why is that important? It's important because it's transparent. The board of the British Medical Journal has a very, very hard thing to do. It is tearing up 100 years of history, or it has successfully torn up 100 years of history. And it has to help people understand the decisions, because people will resist that change. And if you have an objection to something, you can generally see that objection being discussed at some point in one of those board meetings. Points of view are heard. Decisions that are important as to whether to follow the latest trends in oncology care or to report on National Health Service policy can be seen, the decisions can be seen, and people can make those decisions very simply without having to reference or go and ask a manager. They can just go and execute, and they can understand the reasons for decisions. And that aligns people philosophically to the business's direction in a way that you can't do just by using normal corporate communications or the hierarchy of a management team. Anybody fancy doing that when they get back to the office? Sad times. Deloitte won't let me do it, so, there you go. So transparency is really important. As leaders, we have to set a direction, but we have to be really open about the decisions we're making. Another really interesting characteristic of the really successful business is something I'd call flatness. What flatness means is kind of simple. It's a lack of hierarchy. It's a lack of that hierarchical structure. Where in old business you had to have a direct set of instructions as to what you did on a day-to-day basis. In a flat structure, there is much more devolved decision making. And so I'll give you the most extreme example I've ever seen of flatness. It's a company called Valve. Some of you might know them. They are a video games company, or they were a video games company. They launched a very successful called Half-Life, but beyond that, more recently, they have a platform called Steam, which allows them to monetize every transaction in the PC video games industry. So Valve's, roughly speaking, a $1.2 billion company. It's privately held, so information is relatively small. It has 400 employees, just under 400 employees. So let me tell you a bit about them. Valve have no corporate structure at all. They have no job descriptions. There is no hierarchy at all. Everybody is at the same level. They have no corporate strategy, written or otherwise. When they want to make a strategic decision, when somebody spots a competitive threat or an opportunity, they will converse with other employees around them, and they will, if there is consensus, they will form a new team from people who believe that to be something they should do, and they will go off and do that. And if, of course, they decide that wasn't something to do, people just correspond to that as well and don't follow it. They just carry on doing what they were doing. The whole company culture is built around this, right? So if you go to Valve's offices, all the desks have got wheels, all the computers can be unplugged with one plug and moved around. All the lifts are large service lifts, so you can move the desk. So teams will physically move each other to their new initiative and get working straight away. To do compensation, they have a randomly selected group of employees who will select the remuneration or review everybody's case and do the remuneration every single year. Hands up, who is going to go and institute that policy? No, didn't think so. So I really don't think you should go off and do this, but what I wanted to do was express what a very, very successful company that has had growth for a very long period of time and redefined several industries in video gaming and associated things. It is a successful model for them. There are aspects of it that are really important to understand, though, and the major one is trust. So in a structure like Valve, where you have no choice but to trust your fellow employees and trust that they are heading to the same philosophical direction you are. So yes, they have transparency like the BMJ, but they also have trust. And trust, as I go around businesses in all sectors and all around the world, is actually quite a commodity which is in quite scarce supply. And what I'll often see is businesses and organizations that equate collaboration to trust. They will collaborate on a decision, and they think that makes them all part of a happy family. Radically collaborative cultures are also radically untrusting, because if you have to collaborate, you are effectively saying, I don't necessarily think you're going to take this in the right direction, so I'm going to help you. It's a different thing, and it's a really important characteristic, because without trust, you can't act quickly and dynamically. You can't act to a philosophy. You're always waiting for instructions, and waiting for instructions is the management practice of the traditional economy, the industrial economy that we've had for 200 years and is now beginning to fade away. So flatness, transparency and flatness. The final one I'd like to talk about is objectivity, and as I said, I'll reference Deloitte in this because why not? It's our presentation, it's our stage. You've got to live with me for the next 13 minutes and 5 seconds. This is, by the way, our London office. I'm not sure if you think this looks like a Deloitte office, but there you go. We've got, this here is Hannah, who's one of my team members, who's speaking to this robot. It's the sort of stuff that just goes on. It's crazy times for us. So, objectivity. So when we set up Deloitte Digital, we had to recruit a very large number of people. So without boring you with the story of it, Deloitte Digital is a 5,000 strong team globally, 400 in the UK. But we didn't just rebrand a whole bunch of people in Deloitte as suddenly digital people. We went and recruited the vast majority of them. So we had 60 people to start with. We recruited, well, probably more like 400 but by the time you've got a bit of attrition in there. But we didn't really know what we wanted to do, what sort of people we wanted to have. And it got worse in the team that I run, so if Deloitte Digital is a sort of a radical element, we're like the ultra-radical element of the story. We do work where we're helping companies that have got to change their productivity by a factor of 2 or more. Not only that, we've got a task of trying to transform the way that Deloitte itself works. So we're working in an environment where the problem is extremely difficult, the techniques are very unknown, and we've also got to create lasting value for the firm. It's a difficult thing to do. And so I started to ask recruitment people and recruitment experts to find me some new people. And of course, you know the recruitment industry, they're very entrepreneurial, shall we say. And I got sent a lot of CVs. And I get roughly about 300 a month at the moment. I recruit about 1 or 2 people a month. So it's kind of a tough task. And so I started initially, I would start to read these amazing profiles would come through, and I just would get really excited about them. Subjectively, they look great, right? So names removed, redacted to save the guilty. Ambitious commercial manager, led definition of strategy, business plan, 25% growth. This guy's amazing. I mean, he's really good. He should be my boss. Led and matrix managed a team of 15 people. My God, I can barely manage to get up in the morning. I mean, this guy's amazing. And so obviously I interviewed this guy. He didn't get a job. And I started to get a bit concerned about this. So by the time I'd gone through 4 months, I started to realize that every single CV sort of seemed familiar. And I really gave them attention to start with, and then I started to drift away. And so I had one of my team called Rob, who's a really, really smart guy. I had him data mine the CVs and to try and come up with some stock phrases. And it turns out that almost all CVs have got exactly the same language in them. They usually say exactly the same thing, but in a different order. And effectively, when you're choosing a CV, you're just choosing the order you like. It's kind of a bit of a shame. It's a really subjective process, all based on experience. And the thing is, when you get to interview, you've also got a problem because all you've got to really talk about is their experience. It's very difficult to find out what their potential is in 1 hour. Incidentally, as a slight aside, I wanted to do a picture of an interview, and I went to Deloitte's marketing team and asked them for a picture of an interview. And so we got this fine image. This is what it's like to have an interview at Deloitte. You will go to an office with pie charts on the wall, which is very good. The other thing that's slightly curious about this, I don't know if you noticed, is the gentleman is actually interviewing himself but wearing a jacket. Anyway, interviews in my business are more like this one, but that's besides the point. What you get at interview then, you basically at interview, you're testing subjectively their ability to be interviewed, as opposed to their ability to, and you are guessing about your ability to judge their potential and their fit, right? So we changed the model a bit. We tried to say, can we put objectivity into the interview process? So objectivity is all about measurement. Can I systemically measure whether somebody is likely to have the skills I need and fit into my team? And so I went out into the market and we looked for companies that could help us with that. And we looked for big companies and small companies. And we ended up with these 2 startups. Sabre is one based just near our office, actually, in Clerkenwell. NAC, obviously a bit cooler, based in Southern California. Sabre's about 2.5 years old. NAC's about 4 years old. And they do 2 things. This is what we do with them. And what we do with Sabre is we get candidates who are going to come for interview to take a test. And that test is 100 questions, and it asks them about their perspective on the world. And we're not trying to find an absolute answer. We want one perspective and not another. We're not even trying to get a variety of perspectives. What we're trying to do is we're trying to understand how those people will fit with our team. So this is Rob again, just because, he's featuring heavily in this. Actually, these are some scores against a dozen of the people in our team. You can see, actually, there's 2 of them, Ben and Ed. He doesn't necessarily get on very well because his scores aren't very, very similar. And there's Tom and Mike who gets on well. So if I'm going to have him come in to interview, I'm going to have those 4 guys interview him. 2 people who he's going to get on with well, 2 people who maybe he sees the world differently from. So I've already started to put a bit of objectivity into the process. The next thing I wanted to do was to try and work out whether people were going to be good at doing my job, hopefully better than me. So what we do in NAC, they play a game. They don't play this game. This is a platform version, but they play a different game. The game is called Wasabi Waiter. It's a simple game. You play the role of a waiter in a conveyor belt sushi restaurant. Customers come in, and some are more demanding than others. Some have different food tastes than others. And sushi comes onto the belt. And sushi's always coming onto the belt, and it goes off, and it's got different flavors, and some of it stays on for a long time. And you have to manage the restaurant. And there's no right or wrong way of playing the game, right? You can choose to deal with the really difficult customers first. You can choose to manage the process so the sushi's always fresh. There's lots of ways you can do it. It's all up to your personal preference. I'll tell you what is right or wrong about it in terms of our context, though, because we did, as I said, we did quite a complex job. And the team I've got, I was really lucky. When I set it up, Deloitte gave me first pick of any employee in the business in the UK. And so I would say, to be conservative, my team's in the 95th percentile of performance. It's probably better than that. So when they play the game, they're playing it in a way that, for our context, is the best way. So actually, I can start to understand from all of those people who I've got the CVs from, how well they're going to fit, not only how well they're going to fit, but also how well they're going to perform in our environment, how they're going to place a customer's needs before our own, how are they going to innovate versus apply existing practice. You can start to understand that, and you can start to understand the deviances, so when you get to the interview, you can actually ask really good questions about their potential. Not, in Wasabi Waiter, why did you select the Maki rolls rather than the nigiri, but something a bit more meaningful. So what we did was we turned a subjective interview experience into an objective one. It didn't cost a lot of money, it did require a bit of time, but I'll give you some statistics, just because I like statistics, and I did mention objectivity. In Deloitte, and in fact in any management consultancy in the UK, if you were to join as an experienced hire, that is, you've got, say, 3 to 5 years experience, the likelihood is that you will leave in the first year. 60% of candidates who we recruit leave in the first year. Why? Not because we're a horrible employer or any management consultancy is, just because they don't fit into the culture. They were the wrong people. If you're a graduate, the likelihood is you'll be gone in 3 years. And that's just statistics across the entire industry. My team, 2.5 years old now, we have 0% attrition. And that's entirely down to the fact I'm a great manager. Right, final point. How do I get there? So we've sort of talked a bit about the business, about some of the characteristics of those businesses. How do I do it? And when you get to how do I do it, really the question you're asking is, how do I eat an elephant? And as we all know, you eat an elephant in small pieces by tempting it with an enormous football. And why I say that is because it's extremely tempting, because you read the management literature, you watch the TV shows, you read the newspapers, and every single day we're being told we need to be more digital, we need to have a different culture, we need to help the millennials work with us, we need to be more progressive, we need to be competing with Google, globalizing, all of these messages. And it's really tempting to believe that you can somehow jump to being Google or Valve. And everybody always laughs when I say, you want to have a flat structure and you want to videotape your management meetings. The reality is that the transformation to digital culture is exactly the same as any other transformation, with the slight added bonus that this is a more fundamental economic system change, and so people's attitudes are changing as well. And the path that the successful companies we interviewed had taken, some of them over a very long time. I mean, I've been working with companies like Nestle for coming on for 8 years now. It goes a bit like this. You start with applying digital techniques in the business units. You get within the workflows and the practices and the ways of working you have, you start to enhance it. You do digital marketing, you have some field force digitization, you track parcels and logistics, you do small things with the same context. At some point, the amount of money you're spending and the ways you're changing the business become more fundamental, and it becomes a board level issue. And then you get the rise of the chief digital officer, somebody who is given the responsibility by the board to take decisions across the piece on digital. Now, I showed you that picture earlier of all the ways digital can help. There are always going to be tensions in a business. Do I invest in a new sales channel, or do I invest in a logistics system? Do I want new talent, or do I want to spend the money on a better tax optimized structure? You know, there's lots of exciting tensions to manage. The most important thing in this is the role of leadership. If the leaders around a boardroom table cannot look each other in the eye and agree that somebody else is going to take responsibility for those strategic decisions on behalf of the board for the long-term survival of the company or organization, then you're lost. As soon as somebody says, at the boardroom table, I give you the sovereignty to do that, and then behind the scenes go, actually, don't worry about that, we'll do our own thing. No. This has got to have trust and transparency and openness. And as that model goes through, there are ways, and you can read it in the paper, the ways that behavior starts to seep into the business. So people start to behave that. Senior managers start to deliberately collaborate with each other, not in an untrusting way, but in a way that means that their interests are aligned to the long-term interests of the company. And then at some point, you will reach this model where this future digital business model. And by the way, there is no template. For starters, businesses like Google are evolving very heavily to try and understand what their future model is. So if they're still doing it, everybody's still doing it. It's not clear yet what the winning model is. So just to finish, I'd like to return to this. The next 10 years, 40% of the Fortune 500 companies will be gone. And maybe return to the example of my business data company. So I told you 3 years ago, those 1,000 people doing company fundamentals lost their jobs. And that was very unfortunate, and they were disrupted by a 10-person startup. The piece I didn't tell you was who did it, and of course, because every story needs a punchline, the business that did it, well, it was themselves. 4 years previously, we had identified the fact there was a risk, that piece of the pie would be taken away by a competitor that was radically more productive, that would then cause the whole empire to collapse effectively. We tried to get that business line to change for itself. Their response was, well, we could probably take 5% of the headcount out. Wasn't quite what we were looking for, so we helped them buy a startup business in New Jersey. We set them the challenge, compete with ourselves, produce the same data. We'll take a sample of customers. We will ask them whether they want one set or the other set, and after 6 months, we'll make a decision. 100% of those customers took the one from the startup. We actually offered the guy who ran that business line the opportunity to run that. He didn't want to because he ran 1,000 people. He didn't want to run 10. And so it's really important to go back to this. Over the last 25 years, almost all private sector jobs have been created by businesses less than 5 years old. What it doesn't say is who owns those businesses. And actually, not only can traditional businesses survive and thrive in this economy. They can use their brands and their capital equity and all of those things that have made them great companies to create new avenues of growth. Whether they will look the same and be structured the same is a different question. And just to finish, the last point I'd like to make is this also doesn't say that you have to be in the southern states of the USA to do this, right? You don't have to be in Southern California or New York. You don't have to be in London or Tokyo. The rules are being rewritten on what success is in our economy. And so a country like Portugal, with its education and its globalized view, actually can be as successful as a company like the USA. And on that, I'd like to finish. There's a paper you can read on the internet which has more detail on this. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.